An American scientist in 2006 called for using Ebola to exterminate 90% of the world's population. He calls for the death of humanity. He's an award-winning Texas scientist. He was given a standing ovation after he advocated the extermination of 90% of the Earth's population by an airborne Ebola virus. Airborne. Now you were wanting to know, is this thing going to go well, there's somebody talking about it going airborne, this very virus, before it actually happened. But let me show you something else that this man said. After he said all this, he then offered drastic solutions, accompanying his remarks with slide depicting the four horsemen of the apocalypse. War and famine were insufficient for solving global overpopulation, he explained. Instead, disease was far more efficient and swift. At this point, Bianca displayed a slideshow showing rows of human skulls. He says now AIDS takes too long to kill people off. His preferred method of extermination over 5 billion human beings, airborne Ebola. It's highly lethal, kills its victims in days and rather than years. Well, this is very, very interesting, friends, because this is before we even had this entire situation going on right now. This man had an idea. He's a very important scientist, and everybody gave him great accolades. And then shortly after his idea was presented, we're now experiencing something very similar to what he's advocated. There's something curious going on here. And there's more information, friends. Stay tuned. Now remember that he gave this speech in 2006. Of course, something right after that did occur, and that was in 2009, the government of the United States got a patent on the Ebola virus. Actually, they began that process in 2007. Now, I find that very, very interesting. In fact, it's even more interesting when you get the rest of the story. So why does the CDC own a patent on the Ebola invention? That of and in itself is a very curious thing, since now this particular virus is spreading all over Africa and it's threatening to come to America and threatening the entire world. And because this virus is now being said, oh, it's going airborne, and oh, it's killing millions, and oh my goodness. Well, look at this, friends. Remember that this man was, his name was Pianka? Okay. According to the Oxford Dictionary of Family Names, Pianka is Jewish, Polish Jewish, or Jewish Polish, a Jew from Poland. Very interesting, because as most of you know, and anyone who's done any research lately, the Rothschild bankers and all the elite bankers and all the people running Hollywood and all the people running the media and basically the people running this world are of this particular Rothschild Jewish line. I find that to be quite interesting. But friends, here's something that is probably even more interesting. Mr. Microsoft, the CDC, NIH, and Bill Gates owns the patents on this existing Ebola and related vaccines. Now, why would a man like Bill Gates have anything to do with this particular vaccine, this Ebola vaccine? Is he thinking he's going to make some money? That's really what he's interested in. I mean, unless he's so rich that he's got some diabolical plan. But I think it's more in in line with what we know of him that he's really just interested in making money. So, what kind of money do you think he's going to make off of this thing? Oh, what do you know? CDC Ebola patent could earn billions from a pandemic. August 4th, 2014, Atlanta. Panic is slowly spreading across the globe, just like the deadly and incurable Ebola virus. Americans in particular are shocked and outraged that their government is purposely bringing the disease into their country rather than quarantine the victims in Africa. These are the very same experts just humiliated for their incompetent mishandling of bubonic plague and a host of other pandemic causing diseases. And why is Monsanto and CDC and the debt of defense in the middle of it all? Possibly the two most feared and hated entities on Earth are the U.S. military and Monsanto Corporation. Together, they gave the world the WMD Agent Orange and, more recently, genetically modified organism, GMOs. So it probably shouldn't have been a surprise to find out that they are financially invested in the company at the center of the current Ebola epidemic. What is the surprise is that U.S. authorities have now bought two Ebola infected victims into America, exponentially increasing the chances of the virus spreading across our country. Wow, what do you know? Monsanto and Pentagon in the middle. On July 9th, Tecmira Pharmaceuticals in Canada announced it had received an initial 1.5 million investment from America's Monsanto, with tens of millions more to follow. The company's press release explains that the partnership is related to Tecmira's patented agri-pharma products, in other words, drugs for plants. Monsanto is the largest agricultural seed supplier in the world. The company has also become one of the most hated over its genetically modified food products and its unethical methods the multinational corporation uses. While the Monsanto Tecmera partnership has no known connection to the current Ebola epidemic, the Canadian pharmaceutical companies deal with the U.S. Department of Defense is specifically for Ebola. A second press release 2 weeks ago from Tecmera Pharmaceuticals announced the deal with the Pentagon. The U.S. military is paying the company $140 million to test drug treatments for Ebola. The announcement describes how the study is still in its infancy, testing low doses of drugs on healthy subjects to see how high the doses can get before the body has adverse reactions. We at Whiteout Press suspect the unprecedented flying into the U.S. of an Ebola patient, two at last count, might have something to do with helping Tecmira test its drugs on actual Ebola victims rather than healthy volunteers. Drug trials need controlled settings, which don't exist in African hospitals, but they exist in Atlanta's Emory University Hospital. Atlanta is also home to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC. No coincidence. White House and CDC hold patent on Ebola and its treatment. With the recent panic over a global Ebola pandemic, our friends at Natural News discovered that the U.S. federal government actually took out a patent on the Ebola virus in 2010. The patent application is in the name of the government of the United States of America, as represented by the Secretary, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Center for Disease Control. The invention provides the isolated human Ebola virus detonated or denoted as Ebola, deposited with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, in Atlanta. On November the 26th, 2007, and accorded an Ascension number 200706291, the patent description reads, the present invention is based upon the isolation and identification of the new human Ebola virus species, Ebola. Ebola was isolated from the patients suffering from hemorrhagic fever in a recent outbreak in Uganda. Natural News goes on to explain that the patent not only grants DHHS and the CDC exclusive ownership of the Ebola strain, it extracted from the Ugandan victim, it also claims ownership over all other similar Ebola variations, showing what the CDC's true agenda might be. The patent also claims exclusive ownership of most, if not all, Ebola treatments, tests, experiments, vaccines, and drugs. The report concludes this patent may help explain why Ebola victims are being transported to the United States and put under the medical authority of the CDC. These patients are carrying valuable intellectual property assets in the form of Ebola variants, and the Centers for Disease Control clearly desires to expand its patent portfolio by harvesting, studying, and potentially patenting new strains or variants. So, friends, I think it's, I mean, this, when you get several things in a row start falling into place, and with what we know about our government and all the things it's done in the past, with the Agent Orange over there, and you know, it it's I don't think there's any way to deny after hearing this evidence that it's the United States of America that has caused the Ebola outbreak in Africa.